Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Graham Winter is a thinker and a doer. He's been the chief psychologist for 3 Australian Olympic teams, a consultant to the ICC Academy and Australian Test cricket team, is the founder of Think One Team Consulting, and is the best-selling author of 6 books published by John Wiley, including Think One Team, High Performance Leadership, First Be Nimble, and Toolkit for Turbulence, which we're talking about today. Graham, thanks for joining me today.
Brad, absolute pleasure.
I have your book, Graham, Toolkit for Turbulence. Great book, jam-packed with tools and practicality. So thanks for writing it first off. I'd like to start by asking you to define turbulence, VUCA, and anti-fragility, and how they relate to today's world.
Yeah, great question. Maybe if I just put it in the context of the book is co-authored with Martin Bean. So Professor Martin Bean, he was the Vice-Chancellor of RMIT University for 5 years or so, 5-6 years. And I worked with Martin and his team quite closely and their senior leaders up to and during the COVID period. And post the pandemic, he and I had this conversation about the challenges that leaders are facing with uncertainty and volatility and so on. So the classic VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And we sort of both said, yeah, why don't we write a bit of a book about our experiences? And it was really interesting because we then said, okay, we don't want to just talk about the pandemic, so why don't we engage a bunch of other leaders? So we engaged leaders who we knew around the country, so people like Tanya Munro, who runs Defence Science Organisation, heads of people like the Australian Grand Prix Corporation, hospital leads and so on. So people running sort of tech companies and so on. And we posed this question for them, and it was fascinating because while they said, oh yeah, COVID was the issue, oh no, there were so many other disruptions. You know, manufacturers were talking about supply chain disruption, aged care was talking about budget and royal commissions, tech was talking about capital, owner-operators and businesses talking about the sort of pressure to be able to maintain staff and find staff. So we sort of realised that, yes, there is this turbulence, but maybe it's accelerated by the pandemic, but there are so many sources of turbulence. And to me, that's so weird in some respects. Said, well, VUCA, yep, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Let's wrap that in the context of the word turbulence. And to finish off the last piece, Anti-Fragile, fabulous book written a few years ago now, which essentially talked about how do we get stronger when we face these disruptive experiences. And as we talk through, and I guess we looked at the approach we'd taken with our clients, but also the experiences of the chief executives that we spoke to. And almost all of them talked about using the experiences to get stronger rather than just weathering the disruption. So really that's what Toolkit for Turbulence is about, is how do you use the experience of disruption and turbulence to build adaptive capabilities that then enable you to be more effective in the future? Sorry, long-winded answer, but hopefully makes clear sense.
It's your book. I felt as well that what I took from it wasn't just about what happens after, but it's in the moment. A lot of it was practicality to deal with what's happening in the moment when you're in a turbulent situation. So I really, that was definitely something that I took away from it and felt that, I could see that it would apply to the future, but definitely in the moment. So to that point, I mean, COVID was a pretty a pretty crazy time all around. I mean, I can remember working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, trying to understand and comprehend what was happening, how is it affecting, how do we deal with workforces, and trying to get notes out to our clients about what we should be doing, as I'm sure that many other people were. So I guess it's glad that you've used that pain, I guess, and collated the pain of others in various organisations to make something useful and practical from it. So let's start. And if you can, tell us about the pathway and its 3 phases and how they relate to turbulence.
Yeah, the pathway the pathway emerged about 3 a.m. one morning in Melbourne. So I live in Adelaide, although I do a lot of consulting work in Melbourne and Sydney and Canberra. And Martin is based in Melbourne, but he does a lot all over the world. And we'd done our original research for the book, and we were pulling together all the transcripts, and we were partway through. And I think in many ways we were still talking about this concept of how do you weather the storm. We were talking about resilience, that sort of toughness and so on.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I was just lying there in the middle of the night and I was sort of going, the thing that's different about the people we're talking about who seem to be thriving in turbulence is that there's a different kind of step, there's a different set of steps they take. Everybody experiences the first one, which is some form of disruption to your strategy, to your business plan, to your workforce, to your capital flow, to your customer, your technology, whatever. But then it kind of came down to the people who seemed to succeed the most were the ones who didn't see this as a one-off event that you could then just survive and then resume again. I think they were more recognising that, no, the world has shifted. We're in a far more volatile, far more uncertain environment. Uncertainty is almost a guarantee. But we have to provide clarity, we have to build capability. So we ended up with this. I remember saying to Martin, I think it's just 3 steps. I think it's really simple. It's disruption. Then it's how do you use the disruption to your advantage by building capability while you're doing it. Yeah. And then use those skills when the next strategy or the next disruptor comes along to take advantage. Because that's what all these leaders do. They've built capability through the disruption. So I think of a couple of the tech companies, Safety Culture, for example. When we talked to them and they said, our disruption was we had to go from, grow fast, we'll invest in you if you're growing fast, to, no, you've got to be profitable. So suddenly their runway was completely different, but they learned different ways of engaging their people. They learned different ways of making decisions. They learned different ways of learning quickly through the iterations they needed to do, and then they employed that going forward. So for us, the pathway was really 3 simple steps: disruption, use it for adaptation, and then advantage. And the whole toolkit for turbulence is that notion of a great idea, but what exactly are the tools you use to build that ability to adapt? And that's really what it's about.
I think it's kind of bleedingly obvious, but in the moment we never think it. There will always be another storm. There will always be another crisis. We might look at it and say, the pandemic is over. The last major pandemic was 1918. What do we need to worry about? Well, there's always something else. And there's always something. If it isn't global, it could be local or it could be industry specific. There are always things that are coming. So I guess that's what I loved about the book. It is, if you can assume that there will always be storms, we've got to be able to weather those storms, and it's a great toolkit to do that.
Yeah. And I think that, can I just jump in on that and say, and in many ways, one of the most important things for us, we interviewed Kevin Sullivan. So Kevin's a former Qantas pilot, and I was really keen to speak to Kevin because I'd heard about him. And Kevin piloted QF72, which is probably one of the 2 major safety issues or incidents that Qantas has ever had. And very quickly for listeners, Qantas flight, I think 2008, 2009, travelling between Singapore and Perth, just went into a dive, and then, having got back control, went into another dive. So effectively the computers malfunctioned and took over control. Kevin's an ex US Navy pilot and instructor, and thankfully he was at the controls. And talking to him through that, he basically talked about his mental model. So how do you deal with this situation? And his comment was, well, you're experiencing extreme turbulence in this case. So first thing is you've got to calm yourself. And then he said, I've got 3 things to do: aviate, navigate, communicate. And he talked to any pilot, and that's their mental model. Aviate basically means if you're on a plane and there's no runway underneath you, aviate means you've got to keep it in the air. Yeah. Navigate, it's not staying up there. You've got to land it somewhere, find somewhere to land. And then the third one is communicate. You're going to need resources there to help you, particularly with injuries and so on. And that for me, and I guess I've always done it doing performance psychology work anyway, but our whole concept around Toolkit for Turbulence was in a sense helping leaders to say, what's your equivalent of aviate, navigate, communicate? Because you're dealing with a highly complex environment. In complex environments, you need simple mental models. So what are those simple mental models? Because the previous playbooks, which were much more linear, are not going to work in that situation. You're constantly problem solving. And that's why if you unpack Toolkit for Turbulence, you'll find lots of simple mental models that you can then bring into that, whatever that particular event is. That to me is the sort of modern way of leading and the modern way of teamwork.
Yeah, awesome. So can you tell us what's an advantage leader, and what are the 3 principles, or explain if you can, the 3 principles that they use to turn adversity to advantage?
Advantage leader was just not a particularly brilliantly coined phrase that we used because of that pathway. We just saw that the leaders who, you could almost call it like the weather it, endure it leader, or the advantage leader. And I thought we saw those that seemed to be operating best in turbulence were the ones that saw it as an opportunity to continue to build capability for advantage. And I think all your business owners are going to recognise that. You're always trying to build capabilities in your business. They're going to match the demands of your market and the field that you're in. So I think to me that was almost the first piece of the puzzle, was to do that. And then the second bit was really to apply, I guess, what I've learned in performance psychology over the years, and put it into a really simple form. And that was, well, if you're in a highly turbulent environment, the first thing you need to do is calibrate your mindset to suit that environment. Because the mindset that got you where you are is probably not going to work. Like Kevin would say, there's no playbook for this. I had no idea what was happening. I'd lost control of the plane. I needed to solve that. So calibrate your mindset to deal with that. The second piece is then you've got to engage your team. So there's very few complex challenges aren't going to involve some level of connection with a variety of other people. And I think the third one, which I borrowed from Martin, or I think we borrowed from each other as we had conversations through COVID, was be the coach your people need. So because you're in a learning environment, and if you're in a high performance learning environment, your people need a coach. But the coach they need in that environment is going to need to balance out the tasky stuff with the interpersonal stuff, with the emotional stuff. So those were the 3 things: calibrate your mindset, engage your team, be the coach your people need. And Toolkit for Turbulence is laid out in those 3 sections so that you can kind of pull your tools from those various areas. In some ways, while it's not linear, that is sort of the order. If you can't get your own what together first, you're not going to be able to engage your team. If you haven't engaged your team, they're not going to pay attention to you as a coach anyway. So they're the 3.
Yeah. That's to draw from another airline analogy, put your own oxygen mask on first and then look after the people next to you.
Yeah, exactly.
I was really interested in the book. You talked about a common leadership mistake is to treat problems as linear when they're in fact more complex and can go unresolved, which talks about the 2 types of problems. And it made me really think about how do we identify the difference between problems. So can you tell us about these 2 types of problems and why it's a mistake that leaders make?
It's very rare for me to start any assignment with any organisation without doing this. I get them to write on a set of post-it notes to each individual, and the simple test is grab a deck of post-it notes, grab 7 or 8 of them, and write on each separate post-it note a specific leadership challenge, business challenge that you're facing. Spread them out in front of you, and then usually if I've got enough wall space, I'll write the word technical or linear at one end, and I'll write technical or adaptive at the other end, or non-linear at the other end. And the first thing I'll ask them is to think, look at the problems you've got in front of you. How many of these have got a really clear, you know what the problem is, there is a body of knowledge to solve it, you just need to find an expert, and then you'll be able to step your way through it. Because they're linear problems. And if you're dealing with those, to some extent you don't need a relationship, you need an expert. You need a pathway, a process, an analytical process. Then let's look at the other hand. How many of these, the problem to some extent is unclear. Take Kevin's example in the plane. The problem was unclear. It wasn't a case of implementing the solution, you had to work out what the problem was. So there's a discovery piece to it. How many of these will you have to then learn and iterate your way through? So you've got to sort of test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. How many of them are going to require people to change their habits, change their behaviours, change their mindset? Now go and put your post-it notes up on the wall, somewhere between the left-hand side of the linear and the right-hand side of the non-linear, the more adaptive. And for leaders, what they suddenly recognise is, oh my God, most of our challenges are over on the right-hand side. They're complex, they're adaptive, and to me, it's the work that Heifetz did on adaptive leadership back in the early 90s, suggesting that the biggest mistake a leader can make is to treat an adaptive problem as if it's technical. And that I think is the mistake. We treat things as having a linear solution, whereas you can't deal with adaptive challenges without looping and learning. They're almost always going to be complex. And involving multiple people. You're going to have to work with conflict. The further you go into adaptive challenges, often the more emotion there is rather than the less. And I think for a lot of us, what's the expression? People prefer to be unhappy rather than uncertain. So people love that certainty, and I just find so many leaders will just want to go towards the certain, and in the technical part of your business, yep, that's fine. But in the more complex stuff, that is a recipe for disaster, because you
don't actually solve the problem, right?
Yeah, wrong problem.
Yeah, you think you might have solved it for a short period of time, but you actually haven't if you're treating it as linear. Yeah,
relieve the tension. Yeah, the tension. So I think that one, whenever I start with any group, it's let's understand that leadership's mostly about dealing with the adaptive, the non-linear. And I think in our world, the world's become more complex. I mean, pretty much all of my clients are trying to battle this question of what are we going to do with AI? Well, there's a question before that. What is AI? And what does it mean in your business? Because it's not just a large language model. There's a whole variety of other different sort of iterations. And how might it disrupt? No idea. But that's an adaptive challenge. And we're going to have to learn our way through that while balancing out the technical and keeping the business operating as well. And I think that's that's why we need some different tools to be able to deal with both of those.
I think that's a great and practical example, because we're trying, a lot of the leaders that we talk to at least, looking at AI and trying to deal with it in a linear fashion and thinking, well, what do we need to buy the product, or is it going to wipe us out, or you just can't kind of look at it like that. And so, is there an example of how you've seen an organisation look at the AI challenge in a non-linear fashion?
I don't think there's any that are complete on that at the moment, but I think if I was to look at, without naming the organisation, but there's a group that we've worked with in aged care, and I think they're doing it really well in the sense that they've gone. It's almost like when you do the benefits framework at the start rather than the goal. So they've sort of said, okay, we know that the current model for aged care in Australia is unsustainable. The administrative costs are too high. The ability to provide in residential care, for example, is just not feasible. but the demand is increasing. So they're trialling AI in a whole variety of different elements, ranging from, so for example, when someone goes out and deals with one of their clients, there might be 5 or 6 people from the aged care organisation deals with a person on a given moment, and they then have to write up case notes, and because of all the legislative requirements and not unreasonably the legal sort of issues that sit around that, there's a lot of administration. They are taking a massive amount of that out as a consequence of being able to use a combination of voice and integration of AI to build very quick profiles of the services that are being provided, etc. So I think that's one. The second is they're looking at the use of AI from a companion perspective for their people. They're also looking at in their own admin areas, saying, how can we sort of continue to reduce the cost of our administration to our overall business, so we can devote the resources that we've got to enhancing the interpersonal, because we know that that's what makes the difference. So none of those are complete. They're showing some pretty good business cases in some of those areas. But I think, as we talked about earlier, they're learning their way through it. They're putting guardrails around it. And ultimately, they're not approaching it from what is the technology. They're approaching it from, this is the problem that we want to solve, or this is the opportunity that we want to deal with. How do we now go about doing that? And because AI is changing so quickly anyway. And even, they're looking at monitoring, like how do you provide monitoring in-house so that you're minimising the sort of risk and so on. So I think that the transformation is going to be massive over the next few years, and no one person's going to lead that. But I think they're playing in that ecosystem, they're learning. They're also learning from other organisations, so they're going outside aged care to look at how do different other organisations that are quite different deal with some of those sorts of issues as well. So, hopefully it gives you a little bit of a sense, but it's a learning exercise.
We've all heard of core values. I would posit that most organisations have core values of some description. In the book, you talk about something similar called anchor values. Can you tell us about anchor values and why they're critical in turbulent situations?
Yeah, this kind of comes back to when COVID first hit, and Martin, who is one of the best chief executives I've ever worked with, if not the best, and he used to run global products for Microsoft internationally. He was the Vice Chancellor of the Open University in the UK, so it's the largest university by students, running one of Australia's largest universities, an unbelievable human being. And he just said to me, I am so scared by this. I'm worried I'm going to be the Vice Chancellor that loses the university. He said, I can see at the moment a likely $300 million hole in our budget. My playbook's gone. Now, Martin's not someone that can't move that through, but interestingly, he said to me, look, let's approach this differently. You've worked with international sporting teams, you've worked with the cricket team, you've worked with the Olympic team. If I'm the coach, the head coach of that, what would you tell me to do, knowing that I'm now going into the toughest environment I've ever been in? And I just said to him, look, I know the RMIT values and I know you're so committed to them, but I think this is going to be so personal between you and your leaders. I want you to go away, take as much time as you need, and try to understand in your own psyche what are the values that absolutely anchor you. So and the words I used pretty close were, if everything is stripped away, all rules, all data, all evidence, all support, and you've got to make an unbelievably tough call, what values are you going to draw on? Now, Martin suffered a massive physical disability all his life, a scoliosis that physically has just enormous challenges. So I know the life that Martin has lived has been amazing. So he went back and he spent, it took a couple of weeks. It was in the middle, it was like at the end of March and when COVID hit. But I kept pushing him back to say, I want to know what those anchor values are, because at the end of the day, these are the values you're going to be making decisions on. I want each one of them to have a really strong, compelling story, so you can share that story with your team. Because what I ask you to tell your team is, when all else is stripped away, when our strategic plan's gone out the window, when we're doubting the organisational values, these are the values that I, as your leader, are going to follow. And I ask you to come with me on them. And when he did it, it was one of the most compelling sessions I've ever been involved in. And he shared 3 values, and he shared the most amazing stories. And those 3 values were courage, care, and mateship. And I don't know, Brad, how many times in the next, because they were based in Melbourne. Yep. So I was in Adelaide, so we were locked in, like WA, locked in, but they were locked down. And they were, I mean, oh my goodness, they were, the pressure on families and so on.
I mean, for international listeners, Melbourne would have to be, if not the one of the most locked down cities in the world.
Was 260, 270 days of lockdown across different cycles. I think it was the most locked down. So it's just extraordinary. The number of times Martin and I had the conversation where I was pushing back to him saying, Martin, how are you balancing courage and care? Because we've got to cut 250 jobs. I don't want to lose those people. I've made a commitment there. How do you do it with care? Or I just need to protect this person. You're showing the courage. And for him to be able to use that with his team. The other thing that we did was we had previously, pre-COVID, looked at the overall history of RMIT right back to the 1880s. And we had done an exercise with the executive on them as the legacy leaders. So this is the Maori have this wonderful expression of, this is your time in the sun. Your ancestors have been in the sun and now their time has passed and this is yours. And in the future, your time will pass, but others will be in the sun and they will benefit from your legacy. And that's the work we'd done before this. So it was so useful, that alongside Simon Sinek's work on infinite game and finite game. Just that sort of understanding that the challenge we're facing is to stay in the game and to preserve the essence of this university, to do it with courage, to do it with care, to do it with mateship. So the anchor values weren't the values on the wall. They were the values that Martin brought to bear. So often we would meet every Friday online, quick check-in on each of his team. Every Thursday morning we had a catch-up with their team for 15, 20 minutes. The check-in was always functional, social, emotional. Functional, were you on task? Social, where are the relationships? Any breakdowns? Hot, cold issues. Emotions, where are we at? Where are your people at? And trying to keep each of those up as well. But it was those anchor values of Martin's and his ability to stay calm, to stay confident, composed, and clear through that period that I think got that organisation through in amazingly good shape.
And now we're in 2025. What's the legacy of those 3 anchor values? Are they still used? Are they his personal values? Is there any? Do you have any update?
I do, interestingly, because the organisation's changed. It's got a new vice chancellor and so on. But this is a really interesting one, because I've talked to a few clients about this, where they say, well, I left the organisation and now the organisation's shifted. And I just said, Martin, I'm going to challenge you here, because you had a team of leaders, you had about 11, 12 direct reports, and then you had a group of 300 leaders in your broader leadership group. Many of those people are now vice chancellors of other universities. They're running large government entities. There's a whole variety. I came across one who's in one of my defence clients recently. And this is perhaps a fabulous line. This guy said, he said, Martin Bean, best chief executive I've ever had. He said, interestingly, I was there for 5 years. I never had a one-on-one conversation with Martin. And yet he's still the best. And I said, why? And he said, because his values and the way he lived those values were just amazing. So I think the legacy, and I think it's useful to think about, there's a legacy in the organisation. Yeah. I think it's the ripple effect of the legacy. And Martin's team are now spread across multiple Australian organisations and communities. And I see their leadership. He shaped it, and you can see the courage, the care, the mateship are woven in. I think that's where it prevails, some extent more than it does in an organisation. But many of your listeners are founders. It's the founders' values that will still be woven. They stay, and that's why I think anchor values are so important in that context.
I love it. I love it. And thank you for that update. Another thing that I really love, is that you included a chapter about self-care and burnout. It's something that maybe it's spoken about a little bit more recently, but you know, as you and I grew up, let's say, it was just something that you had to toughen up on. So can you explain your perspective around self-care and burnout? And maybe even expand, if you will, beyond the context of turbulence, because I think you do a bit of that in the book, and the importance of this.
Yeah, I guess, Brad, it comes from... I mean, I trained as an organisational psychologist, but I played first-class cricket, and the Institute of Sport were looking for a psychologist who'd played sport at an elite level. So I was sort of an imposter to go into the sport area, but I had a period of sort of 8-10 years where I was close to full-time in that sport area, and then went back into corporate with PwC and then ultimately in my own business. But I never lost sight of the issue that, which is why the first piece in Toolkit for Turbulence is calibrate your mindset. When you're in a high demand environment, you need to turn up with a clear mind. That's probably the most important thing you can do. And clarity of mind comes from treating yourself like an athlete, like a business athlete. So I felt that's absolutely, I feel always working with clients, it's a critical issue that it's not to me normalise self-care. To me, it's just a natural part of the preparation that's involved in high demand environments. You know, you look at some of even the more recent stuff that's come out. It's look after yourself, look after your colleagues, focus on what matters. You know, if any of your clients or any of your colleagues or any of the people listening are sitting at the moment going, oh my God, we're in a mess. Look after yourself, look after your colleagues, focus on what matters. I mean, that's, put it on a card and put it in front of you. So look after yourself means understanding your own energy levels. So we use a simple framework. The acronym is ADEP, Achieve, Develop, Enjoy, Partner. That comes from some of the research on burnout that shows if people are achieving meaningful outcomes, if they're developing and growing, if they're enjoying what they're doing, you're getting energy in, and that the relationships around them are partnerships, so they're collegiate relationships, they're much less likely to experience that sense of getting on the burnout threshold. I've done, as I think I've mentioned to you earlier, I've done 4 coaching conversations with people this morning, 3 of them in Canada and one in Sydney. All of those were based on the ADEP framework, Achieve, Develop, Enjoy, Partner. It's all based on their 2025 plans and on their Q1 plan. And it's me challenging them in each of those 4 areas. Have you got something in that energy, enjoy area? Because if you don't, you'll deplete your ability to be clear and your achievements are not going to be as good. The development's important, the partnering. They're all important. It's which is the most important leg of a 4-legged chair. The one that's not getting attention. So, and I think, and of course you don't pay attention to all those in one day, but over like as a coach, sitting with somebody over a 90-day period, I can challenge them and say, where's the balance between those 4 areas? And if the self-care, which is that enjoy area, is not getting some attention, it'll start to show in some of those other areas. Creativity will drop, relationships will drop, the ability to sort of deal with the new and the complex will drop. So I think it's become more and more important for business leaders to treat themselves like athletes and not to see exercise. And I mean, the guy I spoke this morning, he runs sales for an international insurance company. He's based in Canada. He's all over the world. I said to him, how are you dealing with this? You start at 5 a.m, you finish at 10 at night. He said, I had 3 naps during the day yesterday. That's how he does it. And he's probably their high performer. They're in 10, 15-minute naps, but he knows he's got to do it. You wouldn't expect a tennis player to go out there and hit balls from 5 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. You'd think that was idiotic. but
Yeah.
we do tend to do a bit of that in business. So, yeah, sorry, I'm on soapbox a
I mean,
little bit
that's
there,
how
but I reckon it's
you
super important.
that's how you perform.
It is.
There's a company that we work with,
Mm.
and they're doing quite well for themselves. Uh, they've had all of the leadership team do a lot of work on longevity, and longevity has taken quite a lot of advances in technology recently. So mapping DNA, altering diets, exercise regimes that suit a lot of stuff to do as a leadership team in a business context, but the perspective of the leader is, we know that this is how we perform optimally in the business, and it can make a huge difference. So I think there's definitely some changes in that area that started a few years ago, but again, this firm that I mentioned might be one of the more advanced firms in this area. I don't necessarily know that to that level it would be normalised, but we work more effectively when we're healthy and we have a clear mind and we're not suffering.
It probably then comes down to, when I'm working with teams, often they'll say, what do you think is the most important thing that we need to do? And I always say it's your operating rhythm, or in the military, it's your battle rhythm. So it's that discipline rhythm that would then mean you do allocate the time to do those things. So, we're back to be the coach your people need. Well, the coach that people need is a coach that ensures that all four of those elements of achieve, develop, enjoy, partner are all attended to. To me, again, that's why one of the critical roles of a leader is to coach. Your role is to create, what's the expression we used to use at the Olympics? Our role is to create the environment in which success is inevitable. Okay, well, let's define what we mean by success. It ain't going to be inevitable if you're gassed out. So mentally, physically, emotionally, you've got to address it. Toughing it out doesn't cut it. It's an endurance event.
Yeah. One of the things that we ask all of our leadership teams to do is to learn and to have everybody to continually learn. And this is one of the points that you raise in the book. So what tips and ideas can you offer to help teams learn at pace and on the run?
It's a great question, because I think we just talked about one of the areas that Australian and international businesses don't tend to do enough of, and that's self-care. I think the other one is debriefing. You mentioned high-performance leadership. I wrote a book called High-Performance Leadership 20 years ago now, just coming off the back of a bunch of work with PwC. And we went out and we interviewed and did a bunch of studies across... we went to look for environments where people were operating in what we called small, fast teams. So it was special military, it was emergency medicine, first responders. We looked at orchestras, we looked at agile businesses, and so on. And we sort of came to the conclusion that you could sort of almost summarise that all of these teams operate in this simple sort of loop of alignment, collaboration and learning, and they just constantly align, collaborate, learn, align, collaborate, learn, align, collaborate, learn, a bit like a fleet of yachts. It's like align, yep, this is where we're going, collaborate, yep, whoop, learn, we're off track a bit, now we go again. And the thing that really hit us more than anything else was in all of those environments, other than business, there is a natural pause built in, and usually a disciplined process to learn called the debrief. So in the military, in sport, in performing arts, in emergency medicine, between incidents, for example, there is a debrief built in. There's what happened, what was supposed to happen, what actually happened, what did we learn?
After action reviews,
Yeah, after action reviews. So I think the thing more than anything else, and many of your leaders listening are going to go, you're kidding. Your job at times is to pause the business, not just to speed it up. Because I think what you'll see is in these high demand environments, you talk to SAS leaders and say, what's your battle rhythm? And they will talk about this ability to be able to operate at high pace, but also the after action review or even the in the moment review. So I think it's building in the reflections, the debriefing. And if there's one thing a leader can do more than anything else, it's ask for insights to their own impact. So, yeah, what am I doing that's working well? What's one thing that you think I could do that would make it even better? So that get used to the idea of people reflecting, how can I do better? How can I do better? So you, in a sense, you want the debrief to be in the future. I know it sounds a bit silly that you go back to look, but you don't want people going back and spending too much time agonising over the past. You want them to take stuff and move forward. So, and we know people don't like in business feedback. They don't like asking for it. They don't like giving it. So it's the ability to normalise that. And I think you do that with leaders asking, and you normalise it by building in disciplined debriefs.
I love it. One of the recurring themes through today's conversation has been leaders becoming more coach-like. I kind of see leadership coaching or the leader as a coach philosophy as not being binary but being a spectrum, in that we're all kind of somewhere on it from one extreme to another. Why is it important, do you believe, that leaders become more coach-like, and how can they practically begin to move themselves forward on this coaching process or coach-like process?
Yeah, I've always felt that coaching is an important part of leadership. And if you think of it as, like if you went to the sport area, there's development coaches, there's more coaches that are focused on performance, there's the kind of head coach that's working on strategy. So if you're in an AFL team or a NBA team or whatever, you've got a kind of pool of coaches. So I think in a high demand environment, you need perspective. So a coach provides perspective. They also provide a framework for people to operate in and so on. So I think that's really important. I think the role of the coach, in many ways, it's that ability to learn quickly, as you said. It's that, because the great danger is, I was just awarded through Adelaide University or University of Adelaide recently, and in my acceptance speech, I said in one of my first lectures 40 years ago now, the then professor said, "You're not here to learn, you're here to learn how to learn." And that is just so true. And I've often expressed that. I did it with a group that we're working with in defence, who are sort of got a pretty big challenge at the moment around, probably not say what, but there's a reasonably high profile thing that's going on. And they talk about the speed of relevance. You got to learn at the speed of relevance. So I think the role of the coach is to do that. But also, I think it's also important to recognise that it's not like, here's the list that Graham gave me and now I'm going to go and follow it. Because you'd say, well, a good coach doesn't micromanage. Yeah. You go, okay, well, you've got a new person in a dangerous environment who lacks confidence. What are you going to do? You go, I'm going to micromanage them. Exactly. So a good coach is aware of context, has a set of tools, and will apply a certain level of support and a certain level of direction. And it's back to Hergé and Blanchard, situational leadership, 1960 something. So I think the coach is just one of those personas, but I think it's become more and more important because people don't want direction for too long. They want a partner who can help to create the environment for them to be successful.
Absolutely. For leaders who want to begin building their toolkit for turbulence today, what do you recommend as being the first practical step?
I think it's the awareness of the technical, linear, adaptive, non-linear, and just that recognition that the tools that we've got and the natural tendency for us to get threatened. So, like as soon as our competence, as soon as our autonomy, as soon as our sort of sense of belonging gets threatened, we narrow down and we want immediate solutions and so on. So I think the first piece is just to get to understand what it means to be adaptable and what adaptive challenges are, because I think that's the awareness piece. Because if you treat everything like a technical linear challenge with a right or wrong answer, it's not going to work. But also it's recognizing that as a human being, we all experience threats and we naturally become protective. So I think there's those two bits. Understand that environment and then understand your natural tendency at the time to want to get a bit more tasky or to shut it down or to want to be more dictatorial. and just put a pause in to go, okay, is that the most appropriate way to get and the best way to get the outcome I want? I think it's building those two together.
Awesome. The book that I'm working on at the moment is entitled Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better. Working on a better business. Work to build a better business. Don't work to set lofty goals with no substance. For you, what does a better business look like? If you think about a business, how would you describe a business that's better?
That's a really good question. Okay, how long do I get to think about that one?
No time at all, because it's intended to capture from the gut.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's the balance of the task and the people. So on the task side, it's a better business if it's achieving outcomes. On the task side, it's a better business if people are working together towards those outcomes. And I think if you almost put those two together, it's a better business if there's the superordinate goal, if there's the sort of higher cause, there's the purpose, something like that. So I guess what I'm doing in some extent is describing not the end state, but it's a better business if you're integrating the task, the people, to achieve something meaningful. It's hardly rocket science, is it?
But sometimes the things that are simple are difficult to do.
I think the task and the people is just that. Yeah, I know I tend to go a bit more, despite my background, I tend to go more tasky. They put me under pressure and I'm going to get more dictatorial and more controlling and so on. But if you're aware of that, you put a little pause into it, you get a couple of bits of perspective from people, you can operate better. And I think that's, it's awareness, isn't it?
Awesome. What's a book that you might recommend for our audience?
I read a number of books. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I think the book that's probably influenced me most over the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years is probably Essentialism by Greg McKeown.
It's a great book.
Referred it to so many clients. I think just that ability I love his methodology of, it's nice to know all these things are important, but write down what the problem is if those things don't happen, and now make the decision which problem don't you want to have. Yeah. Because it's a bit like business. Strategy's a choice. So I use that a lot with organisations to help them to have that what matters conversation, because if they're a successful business, there are so many opportunities to pursue, but there are equally so many challenges to pursue. I think they've got to be able to work out what's essential. So it's certainly the one I've recommended the most, and I'm judging by your facial reaction that it's not the first time you've heard or thought about that one either.
Oh no, it's a great book. I first came across Greg when he wrote Multipliers as a co-author with Liz Wiseman, and got to see him present and do some stuff around that, and really respect his way of thinking. And then he obviously wanted to write his own book and just picked a brilliant subject and did a great job of writing it. So thank you. How can people learn more about you, your work, and your business?
Website-wise, thinkoneteam.com is the easy place to find me, and that's got all the links to Toolkit for Turbulence and so on as well. I'll take you to the Toolkit for Turbulence book, which is the most recent, and on LinkedIn as well. So Graham Winter, reasonably easy to find. I think they're probably the two most easy ones, and obviously Google a few podcasts and things like that as well. I pop up in a variety of places.
Lovely. And what haven't we discussed that you wanted to cover off today?
You've been very thorough, Brad. You did your research. You've asked a whole variety of questions. I reckon sometimes when I finish off a workshop, I'll say to people, we've covered a lot of stuff. If there's one thing I'd ask you to think about as you go forward, keep this in mind, and that is, as you face challenges, go people first, task close behind. So I think that's what I'd finish with, because I think that sums it up. It's organisations are about people, but they're also about task. We haven't talked about psychological safety and accountability, and we won't go down that track at the moment. But I think I'd maybe just close off on that. You think people first, task close behind in your emails and your conversations, the way you start meetings. You're not going to go too far wrong.
Love it, because we often think task and then people. Love it. Graham, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. It's been a really enjoyable conversation. And again, love the book. Again, it's Toolkit for Turbulence, the mindset and methods that leaders need to turn adversity to advantage. Graham, thank you so much again for your time today.
Brad, thanks so much. I thoroughly enjoyed the interview, and you did a great job on interviewing me, so thank you.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.